So let's get into the reasons why people buy houses and then debunk them. Okay. So status, number one, when you're buying a house, you become an upstanding member of the community. Um, you can tell people you own a house and everyone admires you, and your family pats you on the back and says, you're doing the right thing. This should be a warning that it's the wrong idea, because everyone else is not a winner, right? Everyone else is leveraging themselves to the hilt to keep up with the Joneses, who are doing the exact same thing. Everyone else doesn't even contemplate freedom because they've become slaves to status, and by buying a home, you just join their ranks. Number two, dreams. The bank, your real estate agent, your family, and society tell you that you're not buying a house, you're buying a home. Homes don't exist. Homes are dreams. Dreams are fantasies. We live in reality. We don't live in dream world. So the dream that you're buying into is home ownership with a picket fence and a spacious backyard and a warm, cozy place to raise a family. That doesn't exist. That is a house, and you can do with a house what you want, but homes don't exist. Okay. Calling it a home is what real estate agents and mortgage lenders do to manipulate your emotions. They sell you a dream of home ownership. What you get is a house, which is a physical product subject to rot, rust, and needs renovations. Okay? Not saying that you can't have a happy family, but I'm saying that's not what you're buying. A home doesn't exist. It's a house. So get rid of that dream. Number three, people buy houses because of pressure. Women pressure men, their husbands, to buy a house. Their husbands are told babies need space. His family and her family reinforce that pressure. The truth is, babies don't need anything except food, clothing, and shelter. It's true that it's much more comfortable to raise kids in a nice big house, but not at the expense of having unhappy, stressed out parents who don't have any time to raise kids because they're both working 11 hours a day. Most guys shouldn't be getting married for a number of reasons, one of which is you can't afford a wife and kids, let alone buying a house. I've got an ex-colleague who's a great example. He was 40, a 40-year-old salesman. His manager was 33, which is bad enough as it is. It was a horrible job, which he hated. He was a broken man, which he admitted to me. He said those actual words. He had a demanding wife, expensive wedding. They took multiple trips per year on credit. And since I met the guy, he already knew he was a broken man, but he went ahead and bought a house, bought a dog, and none of which he could afford. Fully supported by my ex-boss, who went so far as to loan him his appraiser, knowing that he now had his top salesman by the balls for the rest of his life, because this guy couldn't even take a month off. They could put as much pressure on this guy as they wanted because, he had no choice. He had all these things that he had to pay for. And he boxed himself into a corner and did that willingly. So pressure is not a good reason to buy a home. Just because your wife or your family is pressuring you to buy something you can't afford does not mean that you should do it. Instead, tell them you can't afford a house and you'd much rather have a happy family in a smaller place than an unhappy family, a stressed out, unhappy family that has to work insane hours to buy something that you can't afford. Number four, appreciation. We're told that houses appreciate, but compared to stocks and bonds, they are the least appreciable class and the worst investment. So a lot of people wouldn't have believed that until the housing crash in the US. If you'd owned a house at that point, you lost something like 60% of the value in your home. And this is quite common. This happens every 20 or 30 years. From 1890 to 1990, this is from Robert Shiller, author of Irrational Exuberance, who has the largest study on housing prices ever in North America. From 1890 to 1990, the appreciation in U.S. housing was just about zero. That amazes people, but it shouldn't, because the cost of construction and labor has been going down. If you really want to invest in a house, just buy an REIT, which is liquid. The common myth that houses always appreciate in the long run is not true. For evidence, just look at the housing crash that put millions on the street a few years ago in the U.S. and the majority of houses appreciate from inflation. So the average person over like 30 years sees maybe a $400,000 profit, thinks he made the right decision, when the majority of those gains are actually caused by 3% inflation a year. Unless there's a bubble, house prices only rise with salary and inflation. So because prices can't increase more than incomes in the long run. Otherwise, people wouldn't be able to afford them. So the majority of the profit that you see, and I'm not even getting into interest at this point, where you pay triple what the house's value is on the interest, the majority of the profit is actually inflation, which is 3% a year. So that one's dead. Customization. People think because they own a home, they can customize it, whereas with an apartment, you can't customize things. But housing is often restricted by the homeowners association and zoning committees. Even if you can negotiate your way through that approval process, you now have years of renovations ahead, which is a major headache. And a lot of the time, you can't even get approved for what you want to do. Minimalism's the way. I just found a place that was furnished. I didn't have to do shit. I just moved in, and here in Thailand, it cost me 300 US a month. It's a fucking joke. Okay, so it's one of the newest, nicest apartments in the city. Cost me 300 US a month to move in. Moved in fully furnished. If you don't like your place, just fucking leave. Find something you do like. Minimalism's the way. Fuck renovations. Just rent. Okay. Next up, renting. It's just throwing away money. Well, that's not true. Cost of living is a necessary expense whether you own a home or whether you're renting. You can't get away from that. You can't get away from the cost of food, the cost of supplies, and the cost of housing. Those are just necessary evils in your life. You think that renting is throwing away, and ownership, you can dodge that cost. But that's not true, because as an owner, you're throwing away money on interest, tax, insurance, and maintenance. You're always going to be throwing money away, whether you rent or you own. Also, taxes and maintenance may go up faster than rent, so you might have a couple good years until things start breaking down. Then you can have a fire or a robbery, or some major appliances break down, and you could be in the hole. When you rent, you're a client. In North America, you've got a lot of legal rights protecting you. When you're a buyer, when you rent, your landlord works for you. If I have a problem with anything, I just call someone and I come home and that shit's fixed. As a buyer, it doesn't work that way. As a buyer, you're on the hook for everything. It's true as a renter, you don't build equity, but equity is just money, okay? Equity is just a fancy word for money. Instead, you can live in a cheap apartment and divert all your savings towards building a business, or invest in an asset with a better return, like an index fund, which on average over the last 100 years has returned 8%. It's also super liquid. You can sell the index fund immediately with almost no friction.